Huh?
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, featuring your hosts, Taylor Field and Reuben Olson.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am one of your hosts, Taylor Field.
And I'm Reuben Olson, your other host.
Yes, we're back. Reuben, it's good to have you finally back. This is our first episode together of the new year. It's fantastic.
Feels good,
good. A little bit of housekeeping. Check us out on our website, CryptidClues.ca. You can send us an email, cryptidclues@gmail.com, if you have any questions or just want to reach out. And you can find us on social media, Cryptid Clues on Twitter and Facebook, and on YouTube. And you can also find us on Patreon, where you can get some exclusive Patreon episodes and then some early ad-free episodes as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for any of you new people that are just joining in now with the new year, a little bit about this show. I figured it's probably good to give you guys a little insight to what we're doing here. We look into cryptids, we look into locations, we look into all these crazy things, and we just talk about it. We do a little bit of research, and we discuss it. There's a lot of things that we're new to learning about, and I think it's just great to kind of share what we find with you guys.
Sometimes we do more research on some episodes than others.
Yeah.
It's usually my fault when it comes down to the less research.
Well, that's not the case today, because today, what are we talking about?
We're talking about Leviathan. Now, this is a biblical sea serpent, and you can probably imagine what it looks like. Giant sea monster. Maybe you're thinking of like a dragon or a dinosaur, some big underwater snake, and you're not far off. But I think to start us off with, we're going to shift our format around just a little bit here. Typically, we leave the what is it topic until the end. I'd actually like to start with that because there's a lot of lore to delve into, and it's very obvious what Leviathan is supposed to be and what scholars have decided Leviathan is. So, to start us off, what could Leviathan be? Well, the big one is that it's its own biblical monstrosity. If only one of these creatures is left roaming the depths of the ocean, where man cannot find it, there would be no fossil record or reference for its appearance beyond texts and stories. Other options would be that it could be a sea serpent in the same tier of species as any of the lake monster cryptids, i.e. Ogopogo or the Loch Ness Monster. Scholars like to say that Leviathan was a crocodile. That's pretty lame. I think once we delve into the lore, it's going to be very obvious that there's no mistaking it for a crocodile. Mm-hmm. It's either fictional or not fictional, and there's really nothing else it could be. Except for maybe an aquatic dinosaur.
That's one of the most interesting aspects to this, because when you look at aquatic dinosaurs, they span tens of millions of years, and there's still many that are newly being discovered, and the depths of the ocean, I want to say they're endless. I mean, technically they're not, to my knowledge. I mean, we're on a planet. But to scour every part of the ocean, like you said, if there's only one of a kind or something like that, it's hard to kind of pinpoint, okay, there are the fossil remains of it. There's probably many aquatic dinosaur bones in our oceans or even in our deserts that we'll never find. And
exactly.
Some of those, for example, I took a gander at some of the bigger, larger aquatic dinosaurs. And one of them, a Mosasaurus. There we go, I said it.
Good job.
The largest marine creature ever discovered in archaeology. It's a variety of ichthyosaur. Mosasaurus reached up to 65 feet.
Ichthyosaur.
Did I say that right?
Ike? Did it fight for its friends?
Ike. I hope I pronounced that right. I was going to say ichthyosaur, but I realized it's not an ichthyosaur.
Can you imagine being underwater with an itch?
I feel like I have.
No. That's a weird topic. Carry on.
So yeah, it's this Mosasaurus has reached up to about 65 feet, and it is usually a lot longer than most other predators. Then we have the Mosasaurus. Sorry.
Ooh, I'm familiar with that one.
Yes.
I've seen it in some movies.
It was featured in some very important movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was like Cretaceous Camp or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. That's a joke, by the way. Just so you aren't freaking out, we know exactly the movie we're talking about.
Very, very well.
One of the largest sea predators to have ever lived. The Mosasaurus reached 50 feet in length. It was literally a colossal aquatic lizard that somewhat had a resemblance to like flippered crocs in terms of like its fins. Again, this was a carnivorous sea creature and existed during the late Cretaceous period. That period is about 70 to 65 million years ago. Again, number 3 here, we have a Tylosaurus, not a Taylorsaurus, a Tylosaurus, mind you.
Not a Taylorsaurus?
No, I wish. It's a type of mosasaur species, actually, and it had about a length of 50 feet, closely actually related to modern-day monitor lizards and snakes. Fossil remains have been found of its stomachs, and this is just fun fact, indicates a diet of fish, sharks, smaller mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, and flightless birds. And they used to live in the seas of North America during the late Cretaceous period.
Mm-hmm. And all these ones so far are very, very crocodile or whale-like looking things, right?
Yeah, especially in terms of like their scales and like hide, I guess you could say.
When I think of Leviathan, I think more of like maybe a plesiosaur, like an Ogopogo type thing.
Exactly. That's, I mean, I have that on the list here too. The plesiosaur, what looks like the Loch Ness Monster, as you mentioned. It's about, I think, 11 feet long is what I found. Existed during the early Jurassic period. Small head, long lean neck. I mean, you all seen illustrations of Ogopogo, Loch Ness Monster, that kind of thing. The thing with this, again, 4 long paddle-like fins. But the thing with this is, similar to the Megalodon, sightings are still reported every year, regardless of this creature being extinct. And again, like I said, with the Megalodon, that's another thing. Clocking in at nearly 59 feet long.
Clucking in, not clocking in?
Clocking in?
I heard clucking.
Clucking? Yeah, definitely. It could be clocking, definitely clocking. But
can you imagine? We find like a big dinosaur species that's still alive in the ocean and it breaches the water, and instead of some deep bassy moan, it just makes a chicken sound.
Would it be related to the chicken?
Oh my goodness. Apparently, according to scientists, yes.
The T-Rex, right?
Yeah.
I got 3 other giant aquatic dinosaurs here I'll just mention. A Nothosaurus, which is a 13-foot long reptile dating back to the Triassic period. It was about 240 million years ago. Fossils have been found from North Africa all the way to Europe and China. Kronosaurus, 34-foot long, short-necked plesiosaur that lived in the early Cretaceous era. Interestingly enough, it had a 9-foot long head, and some of its teeth could reach roughly 11 inches long. That is bloody
That's
sharp.
pretty long. I would say, out of all those things, probably any of those could be called a Leviathan. Especially in like Middle Ages or Viking times, biblical times. If you saw something like that, you would think it's some giant sea monster. Especially if, we weren't so close to the oceans, you wouldn't see them all the time.
Well, you look at those eras, I would love to speak to a historian on this kind of part, because would medieval knights know what dinosaurs are? I don't think so. I mean, I feel like dinosaurs are much more within the past few centuries, something that we've kind of like analyzed and learned about and realized, okay, they're from this time period. If you
They would just call it a dragon or
exactly.
Leviathan, even if it's on land.
Exactly. The last thing I had was Bacillusaurus, which is a large mammal. It's very much actually kind of very similar to like a whale.
Oh.
I know. the bad word. We don't say the W word here on the cast.
For those that don't know, I just have a weird fear of whales, and I have a little bit of thalassophobia too. So deep waters, I don't like that. Looking up a lot of Leviathan stuff, there was a lot of spooky imagery I didn't like. And honestly, the big sea serpents aren't the scary ones. It's like the calm-looking whales, apparently. That just chills me for some reason. Biblically, though, Leviathan is really not talked about like it's a dinosaur or like it's a crocodile or any of those things. So while I think it's more in the realm of possibility for it to be a dinosaur than a crocodile, I think we should really delve into all the stories and stuff about this creature, because there's a lot, actually. And it's not just biblical in the Christian sense. There's actually lots of other mythologies and religions and stuff that make reference to Leviathan, even just by straight up using the word Leviathan too. But let's start off with the big one, which is where the word originally seems to stem from, which is the Bible. I believe you have some notes on that, Taylor.
I do. So I basically looked at a few of the verses, and I think it's very much heavily referenced in Job. I'm probably not pronouncing any of these. Is it like the book of Job?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not a religious man myself, but I found this to be very insightful and fascinating. So first one I'm going to read off here. May those who curse days curse that day. Those who are ready to rouse Leviathan. That's Job 3:8. Can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook or tie down its tongue with a rope? It's Job 41:1. Its sneezing flash forth light. Its mouth emits burning lights and sparks, and its nostrils emit smoke. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out of his mouth. It's Job 41:18-21. So again, those are just some instances there that, I mean, it's kind of like painting a distinct kind of image of what this thing is starting to kind of like manifest. But again, I'll get into a little bit more of the metaphor I think that's kind of attached with this. Some other quotes, not quotes that I have, but phrasings is, "It was you who crushed the head's Leviathan and gave it as food to the creatures of the desert." That's Psalms 74:14. "There the ships go to and fro, and Leviathan, which you formed to frolic there." Psalms 104:26. "In that day, the Lord will punish you with his sword, his fierce and great and powerful sword. Leviathan, the gliding serpent, Leviathan, the coiling serpent, he will slay the monster of the sea." That's Isaiah's 27:1. These are some mentions of it. Again, like I said, paint that basic image, but if you look at Job 41:12-5, you can get a more clear image of what its attributes and what it consists of. So I think I wrote that here. Yes. "I will not fail to speak of Leviathan's limbs, its strength and its graceful form. Who can strip off its outer coat? Who can penetrate its double coat of armor? Who dares open the doors of its mouth, ringed with fearsome teeth? Its back has rows of shields tightly sealed together." So those are all the verses that I wanted to note down because
I like the description of its back. You know, it's like the scales are so tightly knit. It's not like a scale you can lift up, right?
I think that's where people relate it to the crocodile aspect, right? But I mean, what is it like? I mean, we talked about dinosaurs and stuff like that, but again, dragon, sea serpent, prehistoric dinosaur. There are some realist scholars that interpret it as being a crocodile. But again, like you said, it's not very likely. There's things that don't align with it.
There aren't, and I think that would be if you look at the Bible and the way it brings up Leviathan is actually at the same time it also brings up Behemoth. Have you heard of that, Taylor?
I found that connected with Leviathan when I was researching. Yeah.
They're like the two big beasts that is mentioned that God brings up in the early part of the Bible, and Behemoth would maybe be. Scholars will say it's an elephant. If you think back then, though, I mean, dinosaurs existed. Why would you talk about an elephant in comparison to like a brontosaurus or something, which also lines up perfectly with Behemoth, saying that its tail was like the trunk of a cedar tree. Elephants have very dainty little tails that just flick back and forth. Brontosaurus or any kind of a long-necked sauropod is going to have a huge tree-like tail, right?
Yeah.
So compare that with Leviathan. Why would a crocodile even come close to matching that unless it was like the Deinosuchus or something, which was a huge crocodile? I think it's also worth noting too that when we're talking about Leviathan, biblically, Leviathan is actually only mentioned by name once in Job. The translation refers to Leviathan more than the original Hebrew does. The original Hebrew outside of Job alludes to Leviathan or a creature similar to it, but doesn't directly call it by name. So in Job, that first mention of Leviathan is its only instance of actually being its own species of sea serpent. Every other time it's brought up, whether it's in Psalms or Isaiah or even in Revelation, some people like to refer to a hydra-like being as being Leviathan. There's a good possibility that it's something else completely. It could even just be an allegory for something else.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of passages in the Bible that are just, hey, let's teach you a lesson by talking about something else that's very similar and use that to refer to this topic. So you have to read entire passages to get the full picture, which is how a lot of verses get taken out of context. If you compare Leviathan with even something over in like Revelations where they talk about Hydra-like beings, I think that Job is the only one where you're really looking at the sea serpent. So let's delve into that a little bit more by exploring something else that kind of goes along with the Bible here, but we're going to talk about that after an ad break. And we're back. What a wonderful ad break, unless you subscribe to our Patreon, where you don't have to listen to ads, just a couple moments of silence from us. That's very awkward. So we were talking about Leviathan and its biblical notes here, but there's something else too, and that's in Judaism, where they have the Tanakh. It offers a lot more insight into Leviathan and where it originated from. And it's their version of this that really opens up the lore and talks about Leviathan as a sea serpent even in like Genesis, for instance, here. So in Judaism, we learn that there's actually a male and female Leviathan, but the female was killed to prevent the two from creating offspring and devouring the earth, because God deemed that they were too dangerous at a certain point. If they were to procreate, it would be like having Godzilla have a wife. And then you have the son of Godzilla going rampant and running about. Can't do that. And it's also thought that the flesh of the female Leviathan, which was killed by God, was given in part to the Hebrews as food in the wilderness. And there's some other texts that really delve into this whole story and scenario too. It also gives us insight into the biology of the creature itself. Apparently, it eats one whale every day to sustain itself. Do you know how happy that makes me? I really hope Leviathan's out there eating a whale a day.
That's so sad.
One whale a day. I hope it's a sperm whale, just gobbles it up. One big blue whale, gone. I love the Leviathan for that. That's awesome. In fact, the whale in the Bible that swallowed Jonah, in Judaism, it said that Jonah's whale narrowly escaped being swallowed by the Leviathan while it was delivering him.
No kidding.
Mm-hmm. That's not something you'll see in VeggieTales. The most interesting part of this information, however, might concern the fear of this mighty beast. So many texts claim that Leviathan couldn't be killed by anyone but Yahweh, which is one of the names for God. And the Jewish texts tell us that the one fear of the Leviathan is the killbit worm, which is a type of worm which is able to kill large fish by clinging to their gills. So, of course, any sea creature that's decently knowledgeable about different prey and hunters and stuff is going to avoid this worm if they see it. I mean, fish hate this thing. So Leviathan probably doesn't want to be around it, suggesting that Leviathan was vulnerable to attacks. So it's not like an otherworldly beast. It's its own unique creature here. Undoubtedly, though, if the beast were to be killed in this manner, in Judaism, it would be by the will of Yahweh himself, because he's not going to let Leviathan be slain any earlier than he wants it to be, which is referenced in towards the end times as well. A scholar by the name of Abraham Isaac Cook describes Leviathan as a singular creature, its tail placed in its mouth, twisting around and encompassing the world. It is thought that this is a representation of the systems of the world. The circular nature of Leviathan indicates the balance that can be found in Yahweh's creation. Does that sound familiar to you? When have you seen a twisted serpent biting its tail?
Oh my goodness. Is this like a trick question?
No. It's Norse mythology, Jorman.
Oh, okay.
And if you look into other mythologies and religions, you'll actually find a lot of references to sea serpents that either are exactly as mentioned there or similar enough where God ends up fighting one of these things, or a deity of some form decides to fight a sea serpent and slay it. Back to the existence of there being two Leviathans, though. After killing the female Leviathan, Yahweh used the skin from her corpse to create a beautiful canopy. It is known that the Leviathan has one of the most beautiful skins of all of Yahweh's creatures, making this canopy especially exquisite. Under the canopy, a feast made of the flesh from the beast lays on a table, suggesting that it is kosher meat, because in those days, if it was a reptile or something like that, you wouldn't be allowed to eat it. So this would be classified more as a mammal-like creature, like a fish or something like that, because they were allowed to eat fish. And it's said that when the righteous are taken to paradise in the rapture, they will sit down with Yahweh under this canopy and feast upon the flesh of both Leviathan and Behemoth.
Really, of both of them?
Yahweh also used the remaining skin of Leviathan female, which was the first one here, because he kills the other one at the end of time. Yahweh used the remaining skin of Leviathan to make garments of light for Adam and Eve. Although they had disobeyed his will from eating the forbidden fruit, he helped to ensure their protection on earth by giving them these special clothes. So there's some other worldly properties to them as well. Now, similar stories, if we were to go nuts with all the lore here, you have Baal versus Lotan, Marduk versus Tiamat, Zeus versus Typhon, and Thor versus Jormungandr. Thor versus Jormungandr actually being a trick by Loki where he's told to pick up a cat, which is Jormungandr in disguise, and the laws of weight are kind of switched around, so the cat's just as heavy as Jormungandr is, and Thor can't lift it, so he gets mad. But it's told that Thor will one day fight Jormungandr. And of course, all the other stories of deities fighting a sea serpent are pretty much the same too, where it's one big battle and then there's a big feast or something like that happens at the end. So there's a really common motif amongst pretty much all major mythologies and religions involving Leviathan, which is super interesting. I think, in my conclusion of the topic, if Leviathan stories are accurate, and one believes in the existence of the creature as is, there's a big old sea serpent hidden in the ocean, and that's scary. I'm never going to be able to play Subnautica again.
Like, just biding its time, waiting, or is it actually mobile and, like, eating and living?
Well, think about how much of the ocean is unexplored.
Yeah.
And if they did find something so big and scary, in any way, shape, or form that could prove any mythology or religion, would they tell us?
Definitely not. Did you ever see that movie Underwater?
Oh, which movie?
I think it
Underwater?
was
There's a
called
lot of
Underwater.
underwater movies.
Was it called Underwater?
But I've never watched a movie underwater myself.
It
That
was
weird.
with Kristen Stewart. She was working on like a mining rig underwater, like very deep, and the station starts to crumble apart, and she's getting from one point to another point.
Sounds
to get
better
to
than
a
Twilight.
It's. I've actually become more of a Twilight fan as I've grown older.
Ooh.
I know.
Ooh.
I know. It's
Okay,
crazy.
folks, I'm getting up and leaving now.
It's Madison's fault. But she's trying to get to another part of the station, and when she gets to the end of the station, she sees a giant sub creature coming out of this pit they were mining in. They're deep at the ocean, and there's all these tiny little creatures coming off of its body, and it's this gigantic. I don't want to say humanoid, but it's just a sea monster, a Leviathan-like sea monster, and it's coming out, and she detonates it and blows it up. But it just makes me think and reminds me of that case where maybe it's something that's just kind of buried and deep within the Earth's crust, and it's not meant for us to get to.
Right.
So,
I mean, if you think of all of these things about Leviathan or about the ocean or anything in general, like, it's a good possibility there's some giant creature living way down there. It would be very, very scary if there is just the one and it's the Leviathan, because, I mean, that would prove a lot of things that these mythologies were right, or the Bible would be talking about it, and you think, well, maybe it's the end of times if we're learning of it or something too, but... It's one of those things too, like, you can't really disprove Leviathan as a Christian, for instance, because that is so hardcore a piece of biblical mythology and biblical history. That is one of those things where you go, okay, well, there's a lot of talk, in the Christian community when I was growing up, whether dinosaurs were just put there as a test, which I think dinosaurs existed, of course, or whether the Earth was really millions of years old. How does that play out? Of course, it depends on how you think about things. It doesn't necessarily prove or disprove the Bible either way. But it's the same with Leviathan. I don't think you can look at it and say, well, it was a crocodile. I think you have to kind of believe in this one and say, well, it's a giant sea serpent. And if the Judaism is right too, then there's still a giant sea serpent somewhere out there in the ocean. Just biding its time forever, for all of time. Something that big, who knows how long it could live? You have sharks that live how many hundreds of years?
Yeah.
Who's to say you can't have a creature that doesn't get affected by gravity or something like that and just age? Maybe it can sustain itself for all of time.
It's interesting you mentioned that. There's some things that I had found where in the realm of like God creating these things, or I guess, Yahweh, using these kind of real physical illustrations as a method to demonstrate certain components of God's power and being. Whereas, at least in the Christian version of this, you have the Leviathan to basically remind people and listeners that no power on earth, either natural or man-made, can stand against the might of such a creature, aka God himself. Then again, there's many interpretations of that. One of the ones I found very intriguing was that whole English that whole illustration. Help, children of God, believe that wicked kings and evil forces could and will be defeated. So there is that.
There is. Think to like all the different mythologies and stuff you've heard of growing up as a kid, like the Vikings and stuff like that, or the Kraken. Maybe we have seen Leviathan in some shape or form, and it's just been so rare and dispersed that it's been thought of to be something else. But
it's a case of mistaken identity. That is one of the most famous occurrences, I would say, in the cryptid world.
That is.
An interesting note here, something that I read about this entity actually, in relevance to the metaphor. There's a man named Brian Thomas, and he wrote for the Institute of Creation Research. He had pointed out that metaphors don't deflect spears or scare the daylights out of onlookers. In fact, Leviathan must have really done these things for God to meaningfully compare it to his own might. Now, exploring that a little bit in relation to, again, breathing fire. I'm personally far from having like a degree in like bones and fossils and like record analyzation. However, I imagine that you wouldn't really be able to tell by looking at bones and such if they were able to breathe fire. I mean, that's just my own gauge. However, let's say hypothetically now, a creature like the Leviathan couldn't breathe fire. We would admit that we know more than we do about Leviathans. Does that make sense? Stating something about a creature in the sense like, okay, this isn't a real aspect of this. Let's say Bigfoot. Okay, Bigfoot's not actually fully hairless, or has hair. He's hairless. That's saying that we know more about the creature than we do. So I found several individuals actually mention the fact that fireflies, again, can produce light. Eels produce electricity, and there's even some beetles like the bombardier beetle that can produce an explosive chemical reaction.
Yeah.
Now, if you jump ahead 5,000 years, we could be in the same shoes. Like, well, how is a little fly creating light? How is an actual like fish creating electrical current underwater? You have that disbelief. And if you look at fossils and remains, you might not be able to actually discern like it was able to do those things.
Even a football fish, they have that luminescent glowing orb at the end.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
And it's said that Leviathan's eyes glow too in some stories.
Hopefully not like those to draw in its prey.
Oh, that's scary. But about the breathing fire, and this is one part where the translation gets really iffy. If you boil it down to just the basics, like Hebrew and stuff like that, it would almost make more sense to say that when it opens its mouth, it boils the water.
Interesting. I didn't think of it on that sense. I was looking more like a scientific
like it would pop
kind
up out of the
prop.
water and breathe fire, right?
Not even necessarily. Well, I guess kind of along those lines. I was looking at it more, and I looked up the term actually for this as well. Pyrophoric materials, for example. It's a substance that ignites instantly upon exposure to oxygen. They can also be water reactive, where heat and hydrogen are produced. Most of these materials are metals, but some do exist in liquid and gas forms. So I imagine it's like maybe it's some kind of chamber or appendage inside their body that just they can pull from and excrete out of their mouth.
Think about how hot the creature would have to be inside in its guts and belly and stuff if it's that huge. I don't think water would stay very cool around it. I think it would probably heat things up if it opened up its mouth.
Yeah, especially...
Does that mean everything it eats is cooked?
Or radioactive.
Every time it takes a bite of a whale, it barbecues it.
Yeah, there you go. let's see. Oh, I guess it should be noted, no living fossil examples have been discovered, like we talked earlier, to provide a close match to the description or details of the Leviathan in present times. Yeah, it's really fascinating, to be honest.
And I think another interesting thing to bring up on the Judaism part of it is at the end of times, God comes down to fight Leviathan, and in some stories it said that Michael, the angel, is fighting Leviathan but can't slay it without God's help, and God brings in Behemoth to fight it too, and you get like a monster movie scene with
Really?
Behemoth and Leviathan going at it, and then God ends up slaying both of them for the feast.
Oh, and that's how it ends.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of how a lot of other things end, we're actually going to go on an ad break before we end. Unless you're a Patreon subscriber, in which case you're listening to this right away instead of after an ad. Welcome back, everybody. So it's almost time to wrap things up here. But just back on the monster movie topic, think of a giant sea serpent and a giant dinosaur fighting. That's all I can think about right now, and it is awesome. Also think about maybe the more realistic version of it. Unlike a scholar saying, hey, at the end of time, an elephant and a crocodile are going to do battle. Wow, that's super lame. What about Macaulay and Bombay and Ogopogo having a battle?
Oh my goodness.
Right?
I would pay money to see that on the IMAX screen or the real screen.
Or the real screen.
Not the real screen, actually. Just the IMAX screen.
It's the real screen. You get like a big angel coming down, a bunch of spinning wheels and eyeballs everywhere, and you're just what? Do not be afraid, my child. Well, I'm saying this, but okay, yeah, be afraid.
You mentioned something briefly earlier, and I think it's worth noting that misidentification, where they don't know the word dinosaur, they don't have the proper terminology for it, so they label, hey, behemoth, it's an elephant. And in reality, like, the description is very, very different.
Or think of how something like a chariot of fire mentioned in the Bible or in Middle Ages could easily be a UFO.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's so many terms that I want to analyze and look into, and I had no idea Leviathan was spread so far across so many different religions. And the term itself, like you mentioned, okay, like in the book of Job, that's where it's mentioned. That's where it's stated, Leviathan, and then it kind of is transitioned a little bit more in other mediums, and not necessarily where it's being like they're not referencing necessarily the same thing, but they're kind of treating it like you mentioned, something similar, another aquatic entity of some sorts. It's interesting because the Leviathan also seemed like it was capable of going on land, not just on water. Now, not everything was referencing that, but there were things that were pointing that out. Again, this is a seafaring creature capable of going on land. Its scales were impenetrable. It had crazy sharp teeth.
Well, and if it wasn't capable of going on land, then why would Yahweh slay the female? Because you didn't want them to procreate and mess up humanity.
So let me ask you this. Did Yahweh create both of them to put that emphasis on the metaphor or the illustration of, hey, this is my power, and then he regretted
understanding of, I wouldn't say there's regret. I would say it's an understanding of the passage of time. If God made the world in 7 days, doesn't necessarily mean that 1 day to us was 7 days to God, for instance.
That's true.
If you want to play into the anti-evolutionist theory, you could look at the bombardier beetle and say, well, how did it evolve to have a perfect mix of chemicals without blowing itself up? How did giraffes lower their necks without having heart attacks? They couldn't have evolved into those forms. They would have had to be made already in those forms. But on the flip side of that, too, if you think evolution is possible in the Christian verse, instead of the MC, I'm going to call it the Christian verse, then you could also say that, well, passage of time, maybe the Bible takes place over a lot longer of a period than we thought. Maybe those 7 days of creation are millions and millions of years, and then humanity really just started and it picked up from there to what we think is our timeline now. Mm-hmm. At which point, if God's making a big empty ocean, filling it with life, you could easily have leviathans in there. And then years and years and years later, you've got land and the behemoth and all that stuff. Then humanity comes along and he goes, okay, it's time for one of these ones to go.
Yeah, fair enough. Absolutely. That would be terrifying if there were like thousands of them just capable of just repopulating and growing and getting a little kind of crazy out there.
Mm-hmm. Or then at the same point too, you said, well, did God regret it? He also tried to flood the earth too. Didn't really want anybody to be left except Noah.
Yeah, that's
When
true.
Noah had to beg for his family to come with him. So
Gosh.
the Old Testament God was very, very... Personality was a little bit different. I think over
Yeah.
time, God softened up a little bit towards us.
My gosh, a lot of this is so new for me. I've never been one to explore many aspects of the Bible and different religions. I've looked into certain aspects, and I find it fascinating looking at, in relation, cryptids and church and religion and the different kind of relevances to that. And there's some cryptids that are much more prominent to church and Christianity that I find fascinating. To Christianity, it's just demons and everything like that. But there are things that are acknowledged in Christianity, which, like the Leviathan, it's where it gets really interesting.
Or you could even look at completely out there topics too, like what if the alien creationist topic is true, whereas chariots of fire, UFOs, where I brought that up earlier, God could be akin to a super intelligent alien-like creature to us that decided to make people, or you have people that say, oh, maybe the Greys just intermixed their DNA with something and populated a planet with human beings. Maybe they would go slay a Leviathan because they didn't want them to procreate.
So in that sense, like hypothetically, Leviathan populated planet, Greys come in, drop humanity, remove one
See a
of said
couple of big
Leviathans.
creatures and go, oh, that might not be very safe
Yeah.
for these people are put in here. And then they drop off a whole bunch of prisoner Bigfoots too.
Yeah, just
Like you-
flood it with cryptids.
How many theories can we cross over into our little canon universe here?
Yeah, it's never ending. Never ending.
I'm definitely not on that side of the fence there.
No.
I read about those things and I was just trying to think, how could I piece it all together? Because you look at the mythology and all the different religions and stuff that either you could argue stem from the Bible, or the Bible maybe takes parts of other mythologies to convert people around to. There's so much similarity everywhere you go.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when it comes to Leviathan, it's in pretty much everything too.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's it for all my notes, but I'm curious, now in the great scheme of cryptids and entities and religious beings, where would you place something like the Leviathan? Are you on the spectrum of feeling like there is something very large out there, or are you more on
I
the religious
gotta have
end?
thalassophobia for a reason, and if my Viking ancestry hasn't bled into my origin like Assassin's Creed DNA, I don't know what scares me. Maybe it's a giant sea serpent. Maybe it's a giant sea serpent, or maybe, just maybe, it's a whale. But most likely a giant sea serpent.
Yeah, I have to agree. Out of all the different cryptids, like, again, I believe in many of the land-faring ones, but I have a certain sweet spot for being, I don't want to say gullible, but when you look at certain bits of research, feeling much more susceptible to believing in the underwater ones. Whether or not this is related to dinosaur or whatnot, maybe that's like the dinosaur-loving fan inside of me that wants to attribute it to being a dinosaur or something like that, but I don't really know.
Maybe it's the grand mummy of all ocean dinos.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's all I got.
And that's all we wrote.
Yeah.
Alrighty, folks. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Cryptid Clues. Taylor, do you want to tell them once again where they can find us and subscribe to us?
Yes, you can find us. CryptidClues.ca is our website. CryptidClues@gmail.com if you want to reach out, send us any kind of stories, encounters, just say hi. Social media, Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, and you can also find us on Patreon. Like Reuben said, you can get these episodes ad-free and early, which is a great time. I should have mentioned this at the beginning of the episode, but I forgot. But these episodes, we drop them on Mondays, every Monday. And then I've also been trying with the new year to pump out an episode for the Fridays as well called Campfire Clues, where I just kind of look at different encounters that people have and just kind of like tell them as if we're on a campfire, basically. There's a little campfire sound effect in the background, so it sounds like,
Crackling.
a little crackling, yeah.
We won't need a Yule log on TV next year. It'll just
You
be Campfire
won't.
Clues.
It'll just be me voicing over a cackling fire.
Waiting for you to pull out the stick, add a video to it.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, but thanks again, everyone, for tuning in.
A little Bigfoot hand comes along and just pokes the stick.
That's
Causes
a
the fire.
good idea. That'd be a good Yule log for YouTube.
Heard it here first. All right, everybody, take care and bye-bye.